IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Monday, doing something a little bit different this week. Since I'm not going to be able to go live tomorrow or Wednesday, I wanted to get a show in with you guys on today, so we can have some fun talking about this big game this weekend. Because there was no way, no matter what's going on, there was no way I was going to be able to spend some time with you guys talking about Notre Dame USC. And so I'm here today. I'm excited about what we got going on, folks. Do me a favor before we get started too much. Hit that like button for me. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and make sure you change that reality right now and become a subscriber. But big weekend, guys. Rivalry weekend. It's Notre Dame's rivalry weekend. There's a lot of other big rivalry games going on this weekend. And it's a big opportunity for Notre Dame. I'm going to talk about what's at stake for Notre Dame here as we get ready for this USC game this weekend. You know, kind of what Notre Dame has to prove, what's at stake in this game. I'll preview the game. I'll talk about USC. You know, I've watched a lot of USC this year, what I like, what I don't like. You know, why I think some fans maybe need to pump the brakes a little bit on just assuming this is going to be a blowout. Can Notre Dame blow USC out? Of course, they've blown out a lot of people. Is it a given? No, it's not. It's going to have to be earned. And we'll talk about that and why I feel that way. And we'll have a little bit of fun with that. Salty, yes. Wednesday will be Buy So Hold. It'll be Vince and Trevor. We'll do that. I won't be here. Tomorrow is my grandmother's viewing, and then Wednesday is her funeral. And I have been granted the honor of doing the eulogy for her. So I've got a big task at hand. So that'll be my priority on Wednesday. I will be here Tuesday night we will go live for the playoff release on Tuesday night. I'll be here for that. Thursday we'll be off because I want everybody to enjoy Thanksgiving. I'm going to try to record a video Wednesday night when I get home from the funeral, and just some thoughts about whatever is on my mind about Notre Dame football. And then Friday, we're not going to do a mailbag on Friday. What we're going to do on Friday is we are going to have our kind of keys to victory, score predictions, and then sort of covering the big national games on Friday. And then what we'll probably do is have a mailbag next Monday after the USC game, depending on how that goes, and you know, just a lot of different things going on with that. So we're going to have a busy week, no doubt about it. Going to be a very busy week. But today, folks, the focus is going to be on Notre Dame USC, and the Irish get one more big opportunity to prove what they're about, and I can't wait to dive into that with y'all. So the first thing is obviously USC is a big part of the discussion for this. But before we kind of get into USC, there's the big picture aspect of what this game means for Notre Dame. And, you know, just there's so much at stake this weekend beyond and this is kind of how it should be, right? I mean, when Notre Dame plays USC, you want something to be on the line for one of them, right? I mean, and unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of that in recent seasons. But, you know, 2 of the last 3 years since Marcus Freeman has arrived, there's been a lot on the table. Actually, in all 3 years, there's been a lot on the table when these two teams have met. You know, USC was obviously fighting for a playoff spot in 2022. If they beat Notre Dame and then won their conference championship game, they'd have been in the playoff. They did beat Notre Dame, did not get it done because they got beat by Utah, got smacked by Utah the next week in the Pac-12 title game. Knocked them out. Last year when USC came to South Bend, they were 6-0, undefeated, ranked number 10 in the country, and Notre Dame was trying to salvage their season, having lost 2 of the 3 previous games. And they were a whole lot closer to being 0-3 than they were 3-0 during that stretch. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, obviously Notre Dame got the job done then. And then this week, there's not a lot on the line for USC. They're 6-5. They're now bowl eligible. There's not a lot for them to prove this weekend as far as their particular resume. What USC is going to be doing is trying to ruin Notre Dame's season and ruin Notre Dame's chances for a playoff bid in a place that has not been super kind to Notre Dame in the last 3 decades, which we'll talk a little bit about when we get into the specifics of the matchup. But, you know, short term, and looking specifically sort of at this season, and you look at what's at stake in this game, there's so much more than just winning your rivalry game. It's at stake. I mean, this is the final test for Notre Dame. I get nervous, and part of my pushback with people that are just, they're going to roll USC, and then Notre Dame is so good, and they're all those things. They are dominant. They're playing great football. They're the hottest team in the country. Notre Dame's PR department put out a tweet this week that's going to sound very familiar to things that I've said to you guys, which is just nobody's dominating the way that Notre Dame is dominating. And when you look at the tweet that Notre Dame put out this morning, let me go ahead and find it here, because, all right, since October 1st, so that's basically since Notre Dame's bye, Notre Dame leads the nation in points per game at 44.5, and they lead the nation in fewest points allowed at 10.8. The next closest is Tulane at 12.7. Notre Dame has been dominant. And you look at USC and you think 6-5, and they're not very good, and they're this and they're that. And I'm just telling you guys, this is a much better football team than their record shows. And we'll dive into why that is. But this is the final test for Notre Dame to say, hey, look, we always talk about, the issues that we've seen where, just you play down to your level of competition, or how do you lose to this team? How do you lose to that team? Guys, if last weekend in college football was not a warning to all of us that we should not be just assuming Notre Dame's going to go out there and roll this weekend, you're just not paying enough attention. Notre Dame's way more talented than USC. Well, maybe, but Bama was way more talented than Oklahoma. Ole Miss is way more talented than Florida. Alabama's way more talented than Vanderbilt. Ole Miss is way more talented than Kentucky. Tennessee is way more talented than Arkansas. We've seen a lot of this, guys, where the quote-unquote more talented team this season got beat. Notre Dame is more talented than Northern Illinois. Not that I'm still harping on that game, because I'm not. They're a much better team than that. It's just that you've still got to go out there and earn it. And this is not a game that Notre Dame is just going to show up and USC is going to lay down and die. Because if you think that's going to be true, then you haven't paid attention to USC all year. Because as Marcus Freeman pointed out today, he pointed out some things that I've been pointing out for the last week, is that USC has not lost a single game by more than a touchdown. And they have had a fourth quarter lead in every single game that they've played, including all 5 losses. Their 5 losses are by combined 19 points. And so this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and make a statement, because I feel it's like what I'm listening to some in the media. I mean, there's still a lot of Notre Dame haters out there. I'm so disappointed in some of the things I've heard from, like Joe Klatt, for example, has said some things that, boy, just, man, I used to respect you. And I just, you're kind of embarrassing yourself a little bit with some of your Notre Dame takes. And there's still some of that out there. But there's also a lot of people that are just, Notre Dame's in, they're in, don't worry about it. They're in the playoff, they're going to host. We can talk about somebody else. And I kind of feel like, hey, we kind of remember hearing that from national media way back in the first week of September after Notre Dame beat Texas A&M, and people looked at Notre Dame's schedule and were like, oh, look at the rest of their schedule. They're not going to lose another game. They're in the playoff. Chalk it up. And then, of course, that next week they went out there. And so this Notre Dame football team cannot look at this game the way that Notre Dame fans are looking at this game, which is just easy win, no problem. There's the traveling to the East Coast and then to the West Coast, which has been a really tough situation for Notre Dame over the years. When they've had to travel east and play a game, and then with the next 2 weeks they've had to go out west, it has not been great for Notre Dame. And they've struggled in some of those games, including, going back to, was it 2017, where they had to play Miami and then they had to come home. And then a week later they went, after the Navy game, they went out west and they lost 2 of those 3 games, including Stanford. You look at 2015, when they went out east and played Boston College, really struggled, then went out west and lost to Stanford. We've seen this happen before, and Notre Dame's going to have to make sure that they are locked in a way that right now some of us in the fan base are not, because this is going to be a test. And it's that final opportunity for Notre Dame to make that statement. And here's another thing, you guys know I like looking at obscure statistics. And I was thinking about this, like, man, like Notre Dame's ranked at number 5 now in the polls. And it kind of hit me, it's like, oh man, this is not good, because and Lou Samoji messed with my head this way, because Lou would always talk about this stuff and he would always turn out to be right. But Notre Dame is now ranked number 5 in the AP poll, in the coaches poll. And this has not been a good place for Notre Dame to be. Notre Dame has been since the year 2000. Notre Dame has been ranked number 5, not in the top 5, but ranked number 5 in the AP 7 times, and they're 3-4 in those games, including 3 losses in Marcus Freeman's tenure. They were ranked number 5 going into the Fiesta Bowl. Just, I don't really count as on him, but that's still a loss because that was not his team. They were number 5 to start the 2022 season and lost to Ohio State. They climbed up to number 5 in the AP poll after beating Texas A&M, promptly lost to Northern Illinois. There's also some of the wins have been very ugly. So they also lost to Florida State in 2014 as the number 5 team. That was their first week as number 5. They went on the road, lost to Florida State, who was very good. It's a good team, but they still lost. Their wins are 2020 Florida State during the COVID year. It's a bad Florida State team. 2018 Pitt, they beat Pitt, but if y'all remember, they needed a fourth quarter comeback to beat that not very good Pitt team that lost 7 games that season. And then in 2012, Notre Dame was also their first week ranked 5th, was after they beat Stanford. They climbed up to number 5 in the AP, and that next week they barely beat BYU 17-14. So you look at it and say, you're just one of those weird things that just, I don't know what it is about being ranked number 5, but it's just this kind of resulted in Notre Dame having some bad losses. Hopefully Marcus Freeman can end that streak this season. And that's what this 2024 season has been about. It's been a lot about, okay, doing things that we haven't seen him do at Notre Dame and doing things we haven't seen Notre Dame do, period, in a long time. And those are all parts of growing as a coach and developing as a coach and growing as a program. Is, things that held you back are things you're overcoming now. You think of Clemson and you started to see Coach Dabo Swinney turning things around in 2012 and 2014 and started to, we were talking about this on the board yesterday. And, people like to give Dabo a hard time and some people don't like him. I don't quite understand why that is, but there's a lot of people that don't like Coach and I actually like him. I mean, I know some of the stuff he does is a little frustrating, but I actually like him. And they said, well, he's only good because he landed Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And I'm like, well, that's not, first of all, name me a coach that didn't win, who won in spite of without having good players. Urban Meyer, he won a championship. Why? He went out and got Tim Tebow and a lot of top ranked players, and that helped him be good. Every team wins because you went out and got great players. That's how you win. But this notion that they weren't good until Deshaun Watson showed up is just not accurate. And people forget, after that 2011 season where they went 10-4 and got embarrassed in the Orange Bowl, got beat by West Virginia 70-33. They got blown out 4 times that season. He went out and hot fought. That was year 1 of Chad Morris, and then the next year kept Chad Morris, fired Kevin Steele, and then hired Brent Venables, and they started to turn things around. That next year they went 11-2 and beat LSU in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. The next year in 2013 they went 11-2 again, beat Urban Meyer and Ohio State in the Orange Bowl, and then 2014 Deshaun Watson arrives, and that's when they started to kind of getting more recognition. They started to turn things around under Taj Boyd. But here's the thing about a lot of those seasons, and you say when they started to turn things around. So 2011, they lose 4 games. They go 10-4. Regular season, they beat Florida State that year, but lost to South Carolina, got smacked by South Carolina. 2012, they go 11-2. Their losses were to Florida State and South Carolina. 2013, they go 11-2, and their losses were to Florida State and South Carolina. 2014, they go 10-3. They lose to Florida State in overtime, and then they go down and they finally beat Steve Spurrier in South Carolina. And it was the first time in several years that they beat a Steve Spurrier coached South Carolina team. And that's kind of when you started to feel like they turned the corner. And then 2015, you saw Clemson go out that next season, and of course they went undefeated. They beat Florida State that season in a competitive football game. Ended up winning 23-13. Florida State, I believe, played their backup quarterback. They beat South Carolina that year 37-32, and of course beat Notre Dame also that season. And that was the last year of Steve Spurrier. And it wasn't until they kind of started beating, Florida State and South Carolina that they turned the corner and started to win, doing things they hadn't done. And so when you look at Marcus Freeman, there's no one team that he hasn't been able to beat in his 2 years that's on a regular schedule, but it's more of, hey, can you accomplish this? Can you do that? Can you build this? Can you build that? And so the concern for Marcus Freeman was, okay, you can play well in the big games. He's got 11 wins over top 25 teams in his 3 years, but then you'd have those weird games where you play your butt off against Ohio State and you beat North Carolina on the road and you play your butt off against USC and you lose to Marshall and you lose to Stanford. Like, where'd that come from? You look at last year and just not showing up against Duke and you barely won that game, and then not showing up against Louisville and just the ugly loss to Clemson. And then this year you have that ugly loss to North Carolina. It's like, okay, yeah, you've beat a lot of good teams, but when are you going to stop losing those games? Well, in the last 9 games, we're seeing them start to turn that corner. But this is the last opportunity to kind of say, hey, look, we're not that team anymore. And you go out there and kind of lay an egg against USC, and you say, okay, yeah, you won 9, you're getting better, but you're not there yet because you're still losing to teams you shouldn't lose to. Or do you go out this weekend and say, hey, listen, this is what great teams do. We've got what's in front of us. All we're focused on is what's in front of us, and we can't get there until we beat USC. And so we got to focus all of our attention on USC. We have not arrived yet. We've not accomplished anything yet. We haven't won anything important yet. We've got to go out there as a football team and say, hey, we're going to do this. That's when we learn something about Marcus Freeman and this football team, is to kind of have that focus. And we saw a little bit of that this weekend against Army, where it's like, look, I kept telling you all week, this is a good Army team. They're good at this. They're good at that. And those things are all true. That is a good Army football team. Notre Dame made them look very, very mediocre. Do they got one more of those in them in the regular season? That's what we're going to learn about this weekend. And it's going to be a big statement game for Marcus Freeman for 2 reasons. One is obviously what I just mentioned in regard to, hey, have you truly turned a corner as a program or really taken that hard turn as a program? Or are you going to kind of have that backsliding type of game? That's number one. And number 2 is Notre Dame only has one real rival right now. And like, Navy's a rivalry from the standpoint of it's a rivalry of respect. It's a rivalry of tradition. It's not a football rivalry from the standpoint of, you worry about really ever losing to Navy. It's like somebody, you listen to Jeff Monken's press conference and somebody said, the Notre Dame rivalry, kind of laughed and he goes, I wouldn't really call this a rivalry. He goes, number one, we don't play every year. He goes, but to be a rivalry, you kind of got to win some. You know what I mean? And I thought that was a great comment. And that's why, the Navy rivalry is a lot different from the USC rivalry. The Stanford rivalry is kind of one of those manufactured rivalries that I mean, to me, didn't exist until I was in college. It wasn't even a team you played every year. It didn't start that until I was in my freshman or sophomore year at college. So the rivalry that still exists at Notre Dame, it's a yearly rivalry that matters, is USC. That's the one that you decide to define yourself on. If you beat Stanford every year, nobody cares. You're supposed to do that. You beat Navy every year, you're supposed to do that. It's this notion that, oh man, you look at it and say, there's so many other rivalry games where it's like, if you're an Ohio State guy, you're supposed to beat Michigan every year, but it's not realistic, and then vice versa, but you expect it to do. And when you look at a game like Navy and Stanford, it's like you expect them to win every year, and you should win every year because there's a difference in competition. USC is the one that you expect to beat them every year because you hate them, they're your rival, but it's not going to happen because it's a really good football team. But it's the one measuring stick rivalry of Notre Dame. That's where I'm kind of going with this. Is Navy is not a measuring stick rivalry, because if you're not beating Navy, you are just not a good coach. Stanford is not a measuring stick rival. It was from about 2010 to 2017. They were a measuring stick rival. I even give them 18 because at the time that game was played in 18. They were a top 10 team. They ended up falling out of the top 25, but they were top 10 at the time. They haven't been a measuring stick rival since then. And especially now that David Shaw is gone, with all due respect to Troy Taylor, I mean, Notre Dame's last several games against Stanford have been, I mean, if we're being honest, have been kind of embarrassing. I mean, they're not really competitive games. The game that they lost 2 years ago was just an embarrassing loss. That was a bad football team. And outside of that, Notre Dame has absolutely dominated this rivalry in recent seasons. Notre Dame won in 2018 by 21. They won in 2019 by 21. They won in 2021 by 31. They won last year by 33, and they won this year by 42. It's just not that kind of rivalry anymore. And I don't know that it ever was as far as like a rivalry. They were a measuring stick because when they had the Brennan the Kevin Hogan years, and then before that the Andrew Luck years, which were phenomenal. They were a top program, and you had to kind of go out there and says, hey, like this is what we're all about. But USC is more of your true measuring stick rival, and how you perform against them is defines who you are as a coach. And when you look at the Marcus Freeman tenure, you're getting USC during a time when you played them one year where they were really good. And the next year they weren't. They were okay. You kind of broke them a little bit. This year they're a competitive team, but not a top team. You can't afford to have a 1-2 record to start your career against USC when you haven't gotten the best version of USC, because either Lincoln Riley's going to turn this program around, or they're going to fire Lincoln Riley and they're going to hire someone that can turn this program around. And this is your chance to kind of distance yourself, gain some superiority over them, and let them know, like, hey, listen, you guys are not on our level. And that's another thing that's in stake in this game, is truly taking over this rivalry. And they did that with Stanford, right? Lost that first game and then just whooped them the next 2 years. Lost us to USC in year one. So in year one of Marcus Freeman's tenure, he lost to their two Power 5 rivals, and Stanford and USC. You go out the next year and you dominate Stanford, you dominate USC. This year you dominate Stanford. You've got a chance to dominate USC, which won't be easy. And you have a chance to make a statement in the rivalry. And obviously part of that goes back beyond Marcus Freeman's tenure, because Notre Dame has won 5 of the last 6 against USC, 6 of the last 8. And if you go back to 2010, Notre Dame is 9-4 against USC. So you have a chance to really take over this rivalry if you can win this game at their place. It's going to be big for recruiting. Obviously, you're going to have Madden Faramo there. So this is a chance to make a statement. And there's one other piece to this game, big picture-wise. And that is that your final chance to make a statement to the College Football Playoff Committee. Look, USC is a team that the voters are going to look at a lot more favorably than Notre Dame fans are. It is a team that the computer models clearly look at very differently than Notre Dame fans do. And so this is an opportunity that some of you may not think it's the opportunity that it is when you look at because you just look at the record. And that's fine. You should look at the record. But what you have to understand is that's not all that the playoff committees look at. They're going to look at a lot of things. And I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. USC on the Football Power Index, which Notre Dame ranks number 3 behind Texas and Ohio State. The Football Power Index for ESPN ranks USC 18th in the country right now. Because, again, it takes a whole lot of things into consideration. They've lost to some quality teams. They've been in every game. They've had a chance to win every single game they've played. They are held in very high regard in that aspect. The Sagarin ratings have USC 27th. And then if you look at the Fermo Efficiency Index, which is one that I really like a lot, they have USC 16th going into this past weekend's game. Now, I don't know where they're going. They haven't updated them for this week yet. I don't know where they're going to be, but if they go down, they're not going to go down that much. They did beat a team that he has 65th in UCLA. So they're going to still be a top 20 team. There's no question about that. They're going to be a top 20 team in the computer model. So there's actually a lot at stake here from that standpoint, where this is going to be considered a quality win by voters. And because of all the different criteria that they use. They're not just sitting in the committee with schedules of teams like, oh, USC 6-5, and that's the end of the conversation. That's not the case. There's going to be a lot more to it. And so this is going to be a game that the voters are going to say is a bit of not a full like statement game like Ohio State versus Indiana or Georgia versus Tennessee. It's not that, but it is going to be a game that they're going to look at and say, hey, this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to show us who they are. Here's another aspect of it that I think that makes this very interesting. Notre Dame is still jockeying for playoff positioning. Now, that may change tonight when the new rankings come out. I don't know the answer to that just yet. We'll see how it plays out. But as of last week, Notre Dame was still behind Penn State in the college football playoff rankings. Now, there's a chance that when the new rankings come out Tuesday night, that Notre Dame will leap Penn State. And certainly there's a chance for that. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. I think the committee could look at that and say, okay, Notre Dame's gaining, right? Because I do think Indiana falls behind Notre Dame. And say Notre Dame's gaining on Penn State, but let's just wait one more week and see how Notre Dame performs against USC. Or they could flip Notre Dame one spot ahead of Penn State. And if Notre Dame doesn't play that well in this game, even if they still win, they could always flip it back because you are going to have this final common opponent type of game with Penn State. And there's still a lot of people in the AP voters still have Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. The coaches poll still has Notre Dame behind Penn State. Good buddy of mine, love Mark Rogers, think he's wrong about Penn State. He has Penn State and Georgia ahead of Notre Dame in his top 25. There's a lot of people that still have Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. Heather Dinich at ESPN still has Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. And okay, that's fine. If you are unconvinced about Notre Dame being better, this game could be that final statement opportunity because you're going to look at Penn State and say, hey, listen, or USC and say, hey, look, I know their record is 6-5, but we've seen USC go toe-to-toe with some teams that, beat LSU, took Penn State to overtime. Like, this is not your typical 6-5 team. This isn't Florida, who's got 3 or 4 blowouts on their schedule. This isn't Oklahoma, who's got multiple blowouts on their schedule. This is a 6-5 team that is a couple plays away from being a 9-2 football team right now. I think they were outplayed by Washington. Yes, they had a chance to win that game, but Washington was the better team that day. I think that the Michigan game could have gone either way. I think that the Minnesota game could have gone either way. The Maryland game, they flat out should have won. And this USC football team is very close to being much better than their ranking shows. And so that's how people are going to view it. But you've got that game with Penn State. And when you look at kind of how that game played out, Penn State won that game 33-30 in overtime. And if you look at how the game played, Penn State was down big. They were down 20-6 at halftime. They come back, tie it to 20-20. USC takes a lead. Penn State's only lead, or they had a 3-0 lead early. USC scored the next 17. Penn State kicked the field goal to make it 17-6. USC went down, kicks field goal to make it 20-6. Penn State scores the first 2 touchdowns of the second half, tied at 20-20. USC goes back ahead 23-20. Penn State ties at 23-all. USC scores with 5:56 left to go up 30-23. Penn State ties it with 2:53 left on a touchdown pass from Drew Allard and Nicholas Singleton to make it 30-30. And then, of course, Penn State won in overtime. So you've got a game where you look at that. It was a back-and-forth game. USC was either leading or it was tied for most of the game. So Penn State trailed a good chunk of that game. But in a lot of ways, Penn State did outplay USC, and the committee's going to look at that. Penn State had 518 yards of offense and 28 first downs. USC had 409 yards of offense and 16 first downs. Penn State had 3 turnovers, and that was a big reason why that game was competitive. So the committee's going to look at all those things. And if Notre Dame goes out there and if Notre Dame is behind Penn State and they go out there and beat USC in regulation, but it's a close game where it's kind of back and forth and Notre Dame wins by a touchdown, but they kind of take a late lead or they win by 6 because they kick a couple late field goals, or maybe they're down and they score late. They're going to look at that and say, hey, look, they're the same team. They're the same team. Yeah, Notre Dame beat Purdue by 59. Penn State beat them by 39. They both blew them out. And then there's no reason to say, hey, we got to move Notre Dame up. There's no reason for that. What Notre Dame can do in this game is if they can beat USC in somewhat similar fashion to the other quality teams they've played, then I think that's the statement that could be made. And I don't mean the blowing them out the way that they blew out like Navy and Army I'm talking about beat them the way that you beat Georgia Tech. Even if you beat them the way that you beat Texas A&M, if that game would have played out like it should have, where Notre Dame doesn't miss a couple opportunities, where they were clearly the better team, outgained USC by over 100 or A&M by over 100 yards, where they're clearly the better team. But I don't know if it's plays out the way that the game actually played out, the way it should have played out. But the way it actually played out is it was a competitive game, and Notre Dame trailed for a chunk of that game. I don't know if that's going to be the thing that gets Notre Dame where it needs to be in regard to jumping Penn State if it plays out that way. But if it plays out the way, like, for example, your game against Georgia Tech did, where you're clearly the better team, 18-point win. They scored in the final seconds to make it 18 points. It was never really in doubt. You were clearly the better team, dominated statistically, dominated on the scoreboard, dominated with the eye test. Then I do believe that Notre Dame could go out there and make a final statement and say, if you don't pass Penn State this week, this type of game could allow you to dominate Penn State or to pass Penn State in the final ranking or in the next ranking. And I think that matters. So you're talking about the difference between maybe being the 8 seed or the 7 seed or potentially being high enough to get the 6 seed. And depending on how the Big Ten title game goes, you could jump up and get the 5. So I do think there's a lot at stake. I think 6 is most likely if they pass Penn State, but there's a chance if like Oregon really stomps Ohio State, or if Ohio State stomps Oregon, just like 20-plus point win, that could drop that team down at least a little bit and have a chance to say, hey, listen, we're going to go up to 6 or 5. If you stay behind Penn State because you don't handle business the way you need to against USC this weekend, then you're most likely going to be in the 7th spot behind Penn State in the Big Ten runner-up. And there's a chance you could fall all the way down to 8 if Georgia upsets Texas, because what that would do is that would knock A&M down even more. And if Texas has a similar win over A&M that Notre Dame had, or an even more impressive win over Notre Dame than A&M had, if A&M loses to Georgia in a rematch and loses twice to Georgia, it's going to be very similar to what we talk about with Ohio State and Oregon. If Ohio State loses to Oregon for a second time, the thought is, well, they're going to stay ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Well, why wouldn't the same thing be true if Texas loses to Georgia for a second time and Georgia's a top 10 team? I don't know that Texas is going to go all the way from 3 down below Notre Dame. It's not a given that that's going to happen. So if Georgia beats Texas and Notre Dame stays behind Penn State and the Big Ten runner-up, all of a sudden, you got the Big Ten runner-up at 5. You've got Texas and Penn State in those 6 and 7 spots, and now all of a sudden, Notre Dame's the 8 seed. And I don't know that's why it does matter that Notre Dame can pass Penn State, because that puts them in striking distance for one of those higher seeds. And it's not completely out of the question for all that to happen. Especially the way this season is going. That's very possible. So I think that's why this game, on top of being a final momentum builder, you want to go in the postseason with a lot of momentum, not some clunker of a game that you kind of slept walk through, or you were sloppy, or you're just undisciplined or whatever. You're really going to the postseason feeling really good about yourselves. Now you can get healthy the next 3 weeks, but then just keep kind of building on it. So I do believe that winning this game against USC in impressive fashion is important. It's important for Notre Dame because it does allow them an opportunity to pass. I actually am someone who believes that the committee will pass Notre Dame over Penn State. If they don't do it tonight, that they'll do it next week if Notre Dame beats USC convincingly, because now you'd have 2 common opponents and Notre Dame would just end the season on a streak that just we haven't seen in a long time from anybody, much, especially Notre Dame. So I do think this game matters a lot. So final statement opportunity for themselves, taking control of the USC rivalry, final statement for the committee, ending the number 5 ranked kind of curse. Marcus Freeman's 0-3 as a head coach when his team is ranked number 5 in the country. There's a lot of things at stake in this game. And I would say that I think Notre Dame's chances of making the playoff is increased with a second loss to USC compared to what it would have been a week or two ago. With a second loss, like prior to this past week, I'd have said Notre Dame loses the second game, they're done. They're out and should be out. But after Bama and Ole Miss took 3 losses, I'm not as certain that that's going to be the case, but you don't want to test that theory if you're Notre Dame. You win this game and you've locked up a home spot. No matter what. You win by a point, you've locked up a home game. Whether it's 8, 6, 7, 6, or 5, I don't know, but you're going to lock up a home spot. The more convincing this win is, the more likely it is that Notre Dame can leapfrog Penn State and be in position to be ahead of Texas if Texas loses to Georgia. So if you go out there and beat USC 34-13, something like that, then and Texas goes out and loses to Georgia for a second time, I do think that could be enough to drop Texas below Notre Dame, which would allow Notre Dame to stay in a 6 or 7 spot in the college football playoff. So there's a lot at stake, and that's why beating USC is important, period, because if you beat USC, you've locked up a playoff spot and you're going to be at home. But beating USC in a similar fashion to what you've beat your last several opponents provides you an opportunity to be ranked even higher, to be in a spot where you could be, in that 6-5 range. I think that's very, very important for Notre Dame because of who you're going to end up getting in the first round, and then just the path that it creates moving forward. I do think that's important for Notre Dame. So those are all aspects of this that I look at and say this is what's at stake for Notre Dame. This is why Notre Dame's got to be prepared to go out there and play at a very high level. And if they can't, then it's going to be an interesting weekend if they can't. If they do, then I think I said this on the board last night. If Notre Dame plays their C+ B- game, I think they win by a touchdown. If they play their B+ game, borderline B+ A- game, I think they win by 2 touchdowns. If they play their A game, they win by 3 or more touchdowns. That's just who this team is. That's where Notre Dame is. That's the reality of where USC is. But there's a chance if you play your C game, and that includes some turnovers, that you could lose this football game. USC's capable of beating Notre Dame. And the other thing, too, that I didn't mention is, with USC's 6-5 record, their only home loss was an overtime game to a team currently ranked ahead of Notre Dame in Penn State. All their other losses were away from home. They lost at Michigan by a touchdown. They lost at Minnesota by a touchdown. They lost at Maryland by a point. They lost at Washington by 5 points. USC's been a much tougher team at home. And if you really want to count all the games in California, they are 5-1 because they just won at UCLA last weekend. So this is a game, and staying west, they played obviously LSU in Las Vegas. They won that game as well. USC's been a really tough team when you play them on the West Coast. And they even had Penn State down 20-6 at halftime. So this is going to be a battle. It's one that Notre Dame's capable of winning and winning convincingly, but I think that we need to be able to look and kind of think about what this team is capable of being. So that's what's at stake for Notre Dame this weekend. And they're going to have a lot to prove this weekend, a lot to prove. And if they play the way that they're capable of, it's going to look a lot like what a lot of these other games have played. But I worry that it's just hard to play at this level week after week after week after week and not have letdown games. The positive you can maybe look at is to say some of the letdown games have happened. They just played far inferior opponents, and they were able to win convincingly. Like you could say Virginia was a bit of a letdown game with all the penalties and some of the uncharacteristic drops and some of those things. Maybe they worked their kinks out in those games, and that's why they played so well against Army, and maybe that'll be why they play so well against USC if they do. But they're going to have to go out there and be at their best. There's no question about it. So that's it for hold on a second. So here's a comment. So Irish English said, I can't help but think what you just said is contradicted your tone on the board a bit ago, Brian. saying your general narrative, as I understand it, is that it's unwise to bet on Notre Dame minus 7.5 because they haven't beat USC on the road often. It's not what I said. I said that they haven't beat USC convincingly on the road, and USC has yet to lose a game by more than 7 points. It's the same thing I said about. I don't know why some of you aren't quite getting this. Was Notre Dame capable of blowing Army out last weekend? Of course. Was it proper to assume that it was going to happen? No. Same thing here. Is Notre Dame capable of beating USC? Yes. As I just said, if they play their A game, they'll blow USC out. No one doubts that. It's that nobody goes out there and plays that way every week. Nobody. Joe Burrow and LSU didn't do that. They almost lost to Texas. They beat Auburn by 3 points. That's it. It's if they play their C game, they're going to win by touchdown. Guys, they've played their C game recently. Virginia, Georgia Tech. They've played C games recently. And those teams were not as good as what USC is, in my opinion, or what USC is when they play well. And this is a team that's won 3 of their last 4 games. To act as if we should assume that Notre Dame is just going to go out there and blow USC out and talking down USC like they're no good, they suck, they're this, that's what I'm talking about. Notre Dame fans have this thing where they like to, when they're talking about their opponents, where they all suck, they should blow this team out. But then when other people who aren't Notre Dame fans talk about the schedule, why do you keep hating on Notre Dame? You keep talking about they haven't played anybody. Well, maybe they're just reading our message boards every week, and they listen to us talk about how every team Notre Dame plays sucks, and they're believing what we are saying, that every team that Notre Dame plays sucks. Because every week, oh, Louisville's not that good. They're not that good. Oh, okay. Stanford sucks. Oh, yeah, that's true. Georgia Tech's not that good. I'm not impressed by them. All right. Florida State sucks. Navy's not that good. We should kill Navy. All right. The Army sucks. We should kill Army. Okay. Oh, USC's no good. Should kill them. And then in the same breath, we'll say, I can't believe people keep disrespecting Notre Dame's schedule. Like, you disrespect Notre Dame's schedule. I've been every single week since the Texas A&M game, I got to sit here in the chat and on the message board and have everybody tell me how the team they're about to play sucks and they should win by 30, 40 points. And then y'all get mad when people say, well, you haven't played anybody. Because you say they haven't played anybody. So my point is this. Notre Dame, if they play their A game, is capable of beating USC by 3 or more touchdowns. Who argues with that? Who argues that if these teams both play their best game, that Notre Dame won't win and win convincingly? Are they capable of doing that? Of course they're capable of doing that. But to say that I'm going to just assume it to the point that I'm going to lay money on the game, I don't know how anybody touches that. When you look at the fact that the last time Notre Dame beat USC in California by double digits was 2000. It was almost a quarter of a century ago. A quarter of a century ago. Before that, the last time they beat USC by double digits in the Coliseum was 1988. So since I'm 46 years old, I was 10 years old in 1988. So in the last 36 years, Notre Dame has beat USC in the Coliseum by double digits twice. They've played some bad teams out there, guys. They've played bad teams. 2012, USC was not good. Notre Dame beat it by 9 and needed to break up a pass in the end zone to keep them from making it a one-score game with a couple minutes left. In 2018, Notre Dame played USC, and they had a losing record. They got Notre Dame down 10-0 before Notre Dame woke up. And it wasn't until Ian Book hit Tony Jones on a swing pass with like 3 minutes left that Notre Dame put that game away. So if you think this is just a show up and win by 30 game, I don't know what to tell you. But to take that as me saying they're not capable of beating a team convincingly, what are we doing here? Notre Dame's capable of beating a lot of teams convincingly. It doesn't mean they're going to do it all the time. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't respect the opponent and say, hey, this is a good football team. You're going to have to earn this win. You're going to have to earn a win against USC. So it's just kind of funny that Notre Dame fans complain all the time about how people disrespect the win. And people, I can't believe that the national media is not giving Notre Dame credit for beating Army. Why should they? All last week, I got people getting pissed at me in the chat, people getting pissed at me in comment section, people getting pissed at me on the board because I had the audacity to say that Army was actually a good football team. And then when they beat them, like, see, we told you Army sucked. You say that to me. And then when somebody else says, well, Army's not any good, you get pissed off. You can't have it both ways. That's not rational. So either USC sucks and they should win by 30, and Notre Dame shouldn't get any credit by beating them by 30 because they suck, or say, hey, look, this is a good football team. If you play your best, you got a chance to beat them convincingly because Notre Dame is an elite team right now. That's different than saying they're capable of doing it to say you expect them to do it. There's a difference. Joe Allen nailed it. Army didn't suck. Notre Dame is just that good. Exactly. And that's what was so why I enjoyed the game. But then you have people who spent all week telling me that Army sucked, getting mad at the national media for saying Army sucked. So you can't have it both ways. So you want to know why I said what I said on the message board? It's that right there. This is a quality football team. They have a good roster. They're coached better than they were last year. They're not a really good team. They're 6-5. But they're a competitive 6-5. And if you play your C game, it's a touchdown game. If you play your C game, you might lose. That's a reality. If you play against USC, the way offensively, the way you did against Georgia Tech, the way you did against Virginia to a degree, the way you did it, against Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio, this could be a challenging game. Very challenging game. So it's not like Notre Dame has to play in a way that we've never seen them play. It's if they play like they've played in other games. And the final piece is this, and here's why I get so frustrated by people who sit there and just tell me every week how every opponent sucks, every opponent sucks, every opponent sucks. It's like I don't think that you can really appreciate how good this football team has played when you constantly convince yourself that every team they play sucks. Like if you've convinced yourself that Army sucks and they don't belong in the field, shouldn't have been a top 25 team, the run defense isn't that good, then you don't have enough of appreciation for how well Notre Dame played. You think Notre Dame just went out and out talented Army on Saturday, and to a degree they did. But the level of physicality and execution and all the different things that they showed were exceptional. And if you don't appreciate the quality of the opponent they played, then you're missing out. And that's what I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to pull a Lou Holtz and tell you that some team is something that they're not. I'm not trying to convince you that we said this about Virginia. Guys, Virginia's not that good. They're 5-5. They're 6 and was it 5-4? Their name should beat them convincingly, but they're tough. They're physical. They're this. That doesn't mean they're good. Saying Army's a good football team and has a really good run defense and a run game that's very concerning does not mean that Notre Dame can't beat them and Notre Dame's not good. It means that's a good football team. And in order for you to beat them and beat them soundly, you got to play really good football. And Notre Dame played really good football against them. And that's why, when you convince yourself that Georgia Tech sucks and we try to tell you, hey guys, this is a good football team, and they win 31-13, and we come into the chat after the game and everybody's pissed off because they didn't blow them out by more, that's not a Notre Dame problem. That's a you problem because you didn't show enough respect for how good this team is, how good this Georgia Tech team is, and how impressive that win was over Notre Dame. Then a couple weeks later, Georgia Tech goes out there and beats Miami. And, now they're 7-4 and they play Georgia this weekend. So that's why we do what we do. Is we want to have you guys have a healthy appreciation for the type of – we've seen this before. I tried to tell you all Marshall was a really good football team. You didn't want to believe me. I tried to tell you all Duke was a good football team. I tried to tell you Louisville last year was a good football team, and people didn't want to listen to me. And then they were shocked that Notre Dame, might not kill those teams. And so what I'm trying to do is not to spin something to tell you some team is something that they're not. It's to say you need to have an appreciation for who this team is. The Notre Dame football team has to have an appreciation for who this football team is. So if they do win and win by certain amounts, then you're going to have an opportunity to say, hey, look, appreciate what they did. If Notre Dame goes out there and beats USC by double digits and is clearly the better team, then you're gonna really appreciate how good this team is. I still have Notre Dame fans seriously that somebody I don't want to play Georgia, man. I don't. If you're afraid to play Georgia, then you just it's not even an irrational fear of Georgia. You don't know who this Notre Dame football team is. You don't. If you're I want to avoid Ohio State, then you don't know who this Notre Dame football team is. Do you think Ohio State fans are sitting there saying, "Boy, I hope we don't get Notre Dame in our bracket"? No, they're not, because they actually think their football team is really good. And my thing is, if you understood the quality of the team that Louisville is, that Georgia Tech is, that Army was, that Navy was before Notre Dame broke them, then you'd have a much better appreciation for how good this Notre Dame team is playing. That's why I get frustrated sometimes by that and say the things that I say. So that's my response to that. I appreciate you bringing it up, but that's why that frustrates me. That's why I get frustrated when people just constantly talk down the teams that Notre Dame are playing, because, man, I'm telling you, these are some good football teams that they're beating. They really are. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. So that's part one of today's show. Next, I'm going to get to kind of diving into USC and who USC is and preview this game a little bit. But before I do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you've not done so, shoot me go sign up for the message board at boards.breakdown.com. I know Zach Martin, you had some comments about Dabo. I'm not able to respond to those during the show. If you could do me a favor, bring those up on the channel or on the chat, the message board, because I'd love to engage with you on that. I don't think that was a fair representation of Dabo's issues with what are going on right now in college football. So we could have that, but that's where we can take some of those more in-depth conversations. And Zach, you always defend things that you believe well. I think it'd be a good conversation. So go ahead and throw that on the message board. You've got to be a premium member, and you can do that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right. So in part two of today's show, I want to get into a more specific conversation about USC, and just kind of an overview of USC. For those of you who are not familiar with how the show is, this is not a Notre Dame versus USC comparison at the beginning. It's going to be more just about who USC is, what they're good at, what the concerns are. And then I will talk a little bit about after that about the matchup specifically, since I won't be able to do that again until really Friday. So when you start off with USC as a team, as you guys know, this is a 6-5 football team. USC this season has had a very interesting year. Season started off pretty well, actually. The Trojans began the season in the top 20. Started the season off with a very good win over LSU out in Las Vegas. And a back-and-forth game. It was a good game for 3 quarters, and then the fourth quarter is kind of like neither team wanted to win. Went out the next week, beat Utah State by 48, and then had a tough road loss at Michigan, where I believe Michigan scored a touchdown on the final 10 seconds of the game. Next week against Wisconsin, they were down 21-10 and rallied back and won that game 38-21. Lost on the road the next week to Minnesota. That began a stretch of 3 straight losses for USC. Lost to Minnesota by 10 in a game where Minnesota scored a touchdown in the final 2 minutes. Then they lost in overtime at home to Penn State, 33-30. Lost in the final minute at Maryland, 29-28. And then on a short week, they went out and on a Friday night beat Rutgers, 42-20. Then traveled out to Washington and lost at Washington, 26-21. Then USC had a bye week. And during that time, I think they regrouped a little bit. They made some personnel changes, especially at quarterback. And coming out of the bye week, they've played better football. Beat Nebraska at home the first weekend on the 16th in a 28-20 game, hard-fought game between both teams. USC got the job done and earned a win that got them to 5-5 because they had a losing record going into that game. And then this past week, they obviously had a rivalry game against UCLA, who was playing pretty good football as well coming into that game, at least better than what they had been earlier in the season. They were coming off of a tough road loss to Washington, but they had won 3 out of 4 games. And if you look at their last 5 games before playing USC, they had been competitive in every game. The Washington game was competitive to a degree. Beat Iowa 2017, beat Nebraska at Nebraska, beat Rutgers at Rutgers, and then lost to Minnesota by 4 points. Their loss to Penn State was only by 16 points, and that was a game that was a hard-fought battle. But UCLA had won 3 out of 4, and they were able to get the job done. The game against Nebraska was a very competitive back-and-forth game. Nebraska scored first. USC tied it. Then USC went up 14-7. Nebraska tied it in the second quarter, so it was 14-14 at halftime. Nebraska took a 17-14 lead. USC went right down the field in a little over 2 minutes, scored a touchdown. Long pass from Jaden Maeva to Deuce Robinson to go up 21-17. Nebraska kicked the field goal to make it 21-20. USC put a long 7+ minute drive together late in the game and put the game away 28-20. That drive showed me something about this USC team, that they are, there's been a lot of issues with USC in the past about being a soft football team. That drive showed me that this is not that type of team. Nebraska went out, put a drive together. USC was able to kind of buckle down and force an interception. It was deep in USC territory. Nebraska converted a 4th and 3 on that drive. They converted a 3rd and 10 on that drive to get into scoring range, but then USC ended it with an interception. USC also had a missed field goal in the game. They had a fumble in the game. So they had chances to kind of make that game a little bit more of a convincing blowout, had an early interception in that game. But we're still able to get it done. And then this past weekend, went out and played USC in a really hard-fought game and earned a victory. This is not your typical USC football team in that they're a really soft team. They're not that. They're not like an incredibly physical team either, but they're just not that soft, finesse team they've been in the past. And they're playing better football. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. They're playing better football these last few weeks. Looking at them statistically, offensively, they rank 56 in the nation in scoring offense. Part of that is you want to look like they've got some weird statistics. They rank 33rd nationally in yards per game. They rank 34th nationally in yards per play, which are good numbers. They're 27th nationally in third down offense. They're 35th nationally in red zone offense. Those statistics should all come together to make you say they should be a top 30-ish type of scoring offense. Again, top 35 in yards per game, top 35 in yards per play, top 35 in red zone offense, top 35 in third down offense. Those are all good statistics. Those are all things that tell you, hey, this is a good offensive football team. So then you ask yourself, well, then why aren't they better, right? They're 41st in red zone touchdown offense, which is not great, but still good. But 56th in scoring offense. Why is that? Well, it's because they turn the ball over a lot. And they've turned the ball over 16 on the season 16 times in 11 games, which ranks 77th nationally in lost turnovers. And so that's really been a big part of the issue for USC is just their inability to their inability to protect the football. Now, they turned it over twice against Nebraska and made that game a little bit closer. They didn't turn the ball over at all against UCLA. And I think that was an important piece. If you look at the games that they've won this year, they didn't turn it over at all against LSU. They only turned it over once against Utah State. They turned it over 3 times against Wisconsin, which is why they fell behind 21-10. They only turned it over once against Penn State, forced 3 turnovers, which played a big role in that game being competitive. No turnovers lost against Rutgers. They had 2 against Nebraska, which, again, kept that game a little bit closer, and then no turnovers against UCLA. When they don't turn the ball over, this is a good football team. This is a team that can go beat people. You want to know why they lost to Minnesota? They lost 3 turnovers, only forced 1. I mean, that's the reality of it, is this team cannot afford to turn the ball over, and they've turned the ball over too much, which is why you look at it and say, hey, points per game doesn't match some of those other statistics. And that's kind of where they are. I want to respond to something that Drew Bain just said. Is it a requirement for y'all to speak nicely of our opponents? We shut down Caleb Williams. This won't be close. That's the same crap that people said about Clemson last year. Well, Notre Dame blew Clemson out last year, and this was a better Clemson team that you beat that team 35-14. What you did last year means nothing. So should we have assumed that Notre Dame was going to lose to Stanford in 2023 because Stanford beat them the year before? Is that how we're going to roll? Because of, well, they did this last year, so we should assume that it's just going to repeat this year? That's not how it works. That's not how when you speak rationally, that's not how football works. Right? Because a lot of stuff that some of y'all are saying now is the same stuff that we heard last year about Clemson. It's the same stuff we heard about. I mean, should we have assumed that Notre Dame was going to get smacked by Louisville early in the year because they lost to Louisville last year? That's not how football works, man. So you don't have to say anything nice about USC. I just think if you want to be someone who's knowledgeable about your opponent, you should be able to say, hey, this is what this team does well. It's okay to say that you think Notre Dame's going to beat USC really convincingly. I'm good with that. Notre Dame if Notre Dame keeps playing the way that they have in recent games, they'll win this game by double digits. I have no doubt about that. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. So that's just not how football works. And having an unhealthy view of an opponent doesn't really help with good conversation. That's really what it's about. And so that's what we're getting into. So let's look at the USC defense. What's funny is the USC defense is kind of the opposite of what their offense is they rank 32nd in points per game, but they rank 65th in total yards allowed and 78th in yards allowed per play. Their rush defense is not giving up as many yards. They rank 43rd there, but they're 73rd in yards allowed per rush. And their rushing is really unique because they rank low in rushing yards per game, but they rank really high in yards per carry on offense. On defense, they have a decent top 50 ranking in rushing yards allowed, but they rank 73rd in yards allowed per rush. Passing defense, they rank 93rd overall, but they rank 53rd in yards per attempt and 15th in yards per completion. They don't give up a lot of big plays. They have a very good third down defense. They rank 18th nationally in third down defense, and their red zone defense ranks 74th, which is there's some very contradictory statistics for USC. Very, very contradictory statistics for USC. And, they're a very interesting team. Very interesting team. Salty, you say we're fans and not particularly rational ones, but again, this is Irish Breakdown, man. This is what we do. We actually talk. This isn't a homer site. This isn't everybody sucks and Notre Dame is awesome site. We talk football. We talk reality. We talk rationality. You can be excited about this team. You should be excited about this team. You should think that this team has a chance to go out there and smack USC this weekend. And they do have a chance to smack USC this weekend. And that doesn't mean we can't also appreciate what USC is doing or what USC is or what Army is or whoever else, because then you have I think you can enjoy it more when this team plays well. When Notre Dame plays really well, like if you have an appreciation for why USC has been so competitive this season, then what I think that does is if they go out there and smack USC, then it's going to make you appreciate it more. That's where I'm coming from. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect people to have a rational conversation about Notre Dame or the Notre Dame's opponents. So that's kind of where I'm from. So that's kind of where USC is on the season so far. As you guys can see, they're not really dominant anywhere. They're not really bad anywhere outside of like a stat here, a stat there. Notre Dame has a couple of those as well. And I think that's kind of where this team it's really why they're 6-5, right? Because they've won a lot of games that, they beat LSU's a quality win. Wisconsin's an okay win. Beating Rutgers is a solid win. Beating Nebraska is a good win. I mean, a week later, Nebraska goes out to Wisconsin and just smacks Wisconsin. Or actually, did they play Wisconsin at home? They play Wisconsin home and just absolutely smacked Wisconsin. And now Nebraska's bowl eligible, which is obviously huge for that program. But, they just have enough holes that you look at and say, man, they could be better. They should be better. How much better? I think that's debatable. They have a better roster than 6-5, but is it like they should be 10-2 or 10-1, or do they more have an 8-3 type of roster? When I look at USC, I look at this team as look, they're 6-5, right? They should have beat Maryland. Just that was a bad loss. Should have beat Maryland. They should have beat one of Minnesota and Wisconsin, or Minnesota and Michigan. Like, they should have beat one of those teams. Like, the way they lost late to both of those teams, you got to win one of them, like, based on their talent. The Michigan game was just choking that game away, letting them convert, 2 4th downs. They should have won that game. Minnesota was a little bit more competitive. Minnesota, I thought, in a lot of ways, actually outplayed USC in a lot of ways, where I didn't necessarily feel that way about Michigan as much. I felt USC kind of outplayed Michigan. They had some turnovers that proved very costly. When I look at USC and you say, what kind of team are they really? I look at this team and I think that they're more of an 8-3 type of team than a 6-5 type of team roster-wise. They've obviously made the change at quarterback, bringing in Jaden Maeva. He was a starter last year at UNLV. He was part of getting that UNLV team kind of starting to get the turnaround a little bit. Threw for over 3,000 yards last season and 17 touchdowns, rushed for 277 yards and 3 touchdowns. Coming off of a game against UCLA where, he had a pretty good day passing, made a lot of plays with his legs as well, which I don't think he's a super, super dynamic athlete, but he's a good athlete. But he was definitely a problem for UCLA. Passed for 221 yards in the game, had -9 yards overall because of some sacks, and he had one really long loss where he kind of ran all around and lost a lot of yards, but it's not really indicative of the way that I thought he played in the game. And then he was threw for 259 yards, completed over 70% of his passes, and threw 3 touchdowns against Nebraska and rushed for a touchdown. So, different type of quarterback than what they had under Miller Moss. I don't know I don't know that we've seen enough of them to say that they're better with him in the lineup. I think they've been better the last 2 weeks, maybe. But I think that USC still has some holes, which is why they're 6-5 and why their last 2 games, although wins, were kind of close, hard fought, need to pull it out in the fourth quarter type of wins. But this is also a team, as they showed against Penn State, when they come out and they play well, and they played well against Penn State, they played well against LSU, that they're a football team that is to be reckoned with. We have a different opinion of LSU right now if they beat USC. I mean, they'd be struggling, but they'd be kind of where South Carolina is, where Missouri is right now in the rankings. They wouldn't be out. We'd look at that 3-game stretch of losses and be like, it's tough losses. But before those losses, they'd have been a top 5 to 6 team if they didn't have that loss to LSU. And so then when you lose to A&M and Bama and Florida, you're probably still ranked right now. I'm not saying they should be, but they probably would have been if they had that win. And USC earned that win. And so when they play well, they're a good football team. So when I look at who USC is, I see a team that is more like a team that is they're closer to Georgia Tech than they are Virginia. Right? Is that fair? I mean, Virginia's 5-6, USC's 5-5, Georgia Tech's 7-4. So, like, record-wise, they're right in between those 2 teams. But if you were to ask me what kind of results they have, what kind of roster they have, what kind of coaching they have, to me, they're more in line with a Georgia Tech type of team than they are a Virginia type of team. More athletes, better line play, better coaching, just better overall quarterback play. And when I talk about Georgia Tech, I'm talking about Georgia Tech when they're right, not necessarily the team that Notre Dame played without their starting quarterback, but more of just who Georgia Tech is overall. And we've seen that team will have some bad losses to, like we saw as against Virginia Tech, but also some good wins. So different style and different things, but as far as just the quality of the team, they're more on the same level as a Georgia Tech than they are with a Virginia. And that's why I think this is a game where Notre Dame needs to play a little bit better than they did against some of these other teams if they're going to have a similar result. And we certainly see that. So let's dive a little bit specifically into the offense and defense here next. But before we do, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you've not done so, do me a favor, go ahead and sign up for the message boards at boards.oursbreakdown.com. All right, so let's talk a little bit about USC specifically. And we'll begin with the offense. I think the thing that's been most disappointing about USC season this year has been their offense. And they do some things well, like they move the ball. They put up a lot of yards. They had over 400 yards against LSU. They had over 500 yards against Utah State. They had over 400 yards against Wisconsin, over 400 yards against Penn State. I mean, over 400 against Maryland, over 400 against Rutgers, over 400 against Washington, over 400 against Nebraska. They've only been held under 400 yards 3 times all season. And that was against Michigan, Minnesota, and UCLA. They haven't yet to be held under 5 yards of play. They have been, their lowest yard per play total of the season was 5.2 against Michigan. Their next lowest was this past weekend, 5.3 against UCLA. So they're a team that moves the ball. They're a team that can obviously move the ball through the air. As we saw in the statistics, they rank 13th nationally in passing yards. They throw the ball a lot. So that's why they only average 7.0 yards per attempt, which ranks 84th nationally. They throw the ball a lot. And I think that's a big part of their problem. Is Lincoln Riley he's so insistent on throwing the ball a ton that I think it's kept them from being the team that they are. When you actually look at USC and when their offense is at its best, I actually think their offense is at its best when he uses the run game more effectively. And I just don't think he does that. They had 29 carries for 86 yards against UCLA, but if you look at the box score, some of that was scrambles by the quarterback. They didn't really allow Woody Marks to get going the way that I think he's capable of. When they use him, he's been a pretty good back. Their 2 running backs combined for 100 yards on 22 carries. And, I feel like that's been the thing that's been, if you're a USC fan, frustrating, is just the unwillingness to use the ground game. And if you look at the performance against UCLA, I mean, UCLA's only given up 99.3 rushing yards per game. I mean, they haven't allowed a team to go for the only team that all year that went for over 140 yards against UCLA's defense was Oregon. And as I said, the 2 running backs combined for over 100 yards. And I just think Lincoln Riley has just not been willing to run the ball the way that I think he should, because he's out to prove to everybody how smart he is. The run game was a big reason they had the success they had against Penn State. And they ran for 183 yards against Penn State. That was a big part of that performance. They ran for 182 yards in the win over Nebraska. So when they commit to running the football, they're actually pretty good about it. And a big reason for that is this is a big offensive line. It's not a super athletic offensive line, but it's a big offensive line. Their left tackle, Elijah Page, is 6'7", 320. Their left guard, Emmanuel Pregnon, is 6'5", 320. Their center, Jonah Monheim, who has played everywhere for them in the past. He was, I think, their left tackle last year. He's 6'5", 310. Alani Noah, who's their right guard, is 6'5", 335. And Mason Murphy, their right tackle, is 6'5", 315. The thing is, they're not a very good pass pro team. I mean, they give up a lot of pressures, but they've been a pretty solid run team all year. And a lot of that is due to their size. And Woody Marks is a quality running back. Their number 2 running back that they have, Quentin Joyner's an explosive running back. If you look at his numbers on the season, he's averaging 7.5 yards a carry. He's a freshman out of Texas. He's got 395 rushing yards on only 53 carries, 3 touchdowns. So he's a guy that's got some explosiveness. Had 3 carries for 82 yards against Penn State, including a 75-yard run. And that game went for 10 for 84 against Utah State. So he's a guy that has some ability. So I won't be shocked if Lincoln Riley comes out and just tries to throw the ball over the field, because that's who Lincoln Riley is. But if he's smart, and not smart like X's and O's smart, but like smart in that, like, hey, this isn't about me. This is about what's best for my football team. If he's smart, he'll come out there, spread the ball, and run the ball more effectively. And the reason I think there's a chance he does that is I think that's what hurt them last year when they played Notre Dame. They didn't try to run the ball at all against Notre Dame last year. I mean, they came out throwing early and often, and Notre Dame just whooped them. 2 years ago, when they beat Notre Dame at the end of the year, Notre Dame had a really good pass defense that season too, and they were playing at a pretty high level at that point in time. And their game plan was geared early on around running the ball with Austin Jones. And they were effective. They ran for over 200 yards against Notre Dame that day and had a lot of success running on this Al Golden defense that season. Last year, they just fell, and part of it is they fell behind so quickly that they almost kind of had to throw the football. Don't be shocked if USC comes out and tries to run the football. And a lot of you will look at USC's rush offense and say, oh, they're not very good. They rank 84th nationally in yards per game. Fair. But that's more of a usage thing. I look at the fact that there's 22nd nationally in yards per rush. That's the statistic that means a little bit more to me, because what that tells me is when they want to run the ball effectively, they can run the ball effectively. And if they ran the ball more, I think they'd be more effective at it. And when you look at Notre Dame's offense, their schedule this season, they're not that far away from Louisville. Louisville's at 5.4 yards per carry. Obviously, Navy was at 5.4, a little bit of a different offense than what other teams are. And Army obviously is at 5.9. Again, very different offense. But the only of the Power 4 teams that Notre Dame has played, the only team that's got a better yards per carry average than them is Louisville, who's at 5.4. They're at 5.2. Your next closest is Texas A&M at 5.0, 4.96. Northern Illinois is 4.9. We know what they did to Notre Dame. Georgia Tech is 4.9. They'd be a lot higher if it wasn't for Notre Dame. So just yards per attempt, this team is the second most efficient Power 5 team that Notre Dame will play all year. So I won't be shocked at all if they don't come out and try to run the ball a little bit more on Notre Dame early and try to keep some balance. And also the way Notre Dame's offense has been playing, I don't know that they want to necessarily give this offense a lot of possessions early on. So I think that's what you're going to see is in that game. And one of the comments is the new quarterback isn't ready for the pass rush or a Golden defense. Well, we'll see. I will hope not, but that's why I think running the football could be effective for them, because Notre Dame is an undersized defense. Even if Howard Cross plays, he's going to be not 100%. You don't have great edge rushers. So what should you do? Neutralize that pass rush, neutralize that defense by running the football, which has been the one Achilles heel for this defense at times this season. Remember, Notre Dame held Louisville, and I kind of air quote that a little bit. They held Louisville to 131 yards rushing, but remember, they had a 40-plus yard loss on a muffed punt, a ball that sailed over the punter's head that went 40 yards back that took away from it. The offense actually rushed for over 170 yards in that game. So I think that's the matchup that I'm most concerned with for Notre Dame when you look at it. Now, the counter to that is when you look at USC, they haven't allowed a lot of tackles for loss this year. They're a big physical offensive line. Where I think Notre Dame could give them some problems is I think that some of the better run defenses they've played this year have been teams that get by on being big and physical. Notre Dame's kind of the opposite. Notre Dame is more about penetration and pressure and quickness and leverage and things like that. And that's a little bit of a different matchup for USC. So it's which part is going to carry the day. Is it the size and physicality of USC? Not size and physical. They're not a super physical team. They're just big and they're kind of strong. Or is it the athleticism, the discipline, and the leverage that the Notre Dame defensive line can play with? That's going to be a big part of this game, because I do believe that USC, when they are on, can be a team that can make it a little bit challenging for your run defense when they want to. And I have a feeling that this is going to be a game where Lincoln Riley tries to come out and be more balanced early in this game. If he doesn't, if he just tries to come out and throw the ball all over the field, then I don't know that this game is going to be close. I really don't. He may hit a play or two here and there. They do have talented receivers. He may throw a screen to Zechariah Branch that turns into a big play. He hasn't really developed as a receiver. He's a very dynamic return guy, but just not a super impactful receiver just yet. But you want to make sure that doesn't start this week, right? But he leads their team second in their team in catches. Their leading pass catcher is actually their running back at 47. Mekhi Lemon leads them in yards. Kyron Hudson's coming off of a good game. They got Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson. They've got a lot of Lake McRae as tight ends, a good football player. They have a lot of weapons at receiver. They spread the ball around really well. They have not been a great big play offense this year in the pass game. They're capable of it. They pulled out a couple trick plays against UCLA as well, which I thought was interesting. But I look at it and say, if they think that this is going to be an athlete game, I don't know that that's smart. I don't know that, because the thing about their offensive line is they're big, but they're not very athletic as a tackle or guard. They're big guys. They struggle they do struggle with pass rushes. They rank 21st in the country in sacks allowed, but that's because they get the ball out so quickly. They've actually given up a lot of pressure. So, I mean, we've talked about Notre Dame and how Notre Dame's offense has got to get better at this and got to get better at that. Well, consider this. So when you look at the Notre Dame offensive line and you look at the issues that we've had with them, right? And, Riley Leonard protects you from not giving up more sacks, and that's all true. But Notre Dame this season, their offensive line has allowed on the season 70 pressures on the season. Anthony Knapp leads your team with 21. He has given up the most. Next is Emil Wagner at 18. So that's 39 pressures allowed. Okay. Now, again, Notre Dame's not a team that throws the ball a ton, but they throw the ball enough to where that number means something. Then you look at USC. And yes, they're good at not giving up a lot of sacks. But when you look at their numbers and you take a little bit of a deeper dive, they have allowed 107 pressures on the season. Elijah Page, their left tackle, has allowed 25 pressures, 9 sacks or hits on the quarterback. Mason Murphy has allowed 24 pressures with 13 of those being sacks or hits on the quarterback. That is a lot of hits on the quarterback. And that's not where you really want to be. And when you look, as I pointed out, the Notre Dame guys and what they do is Anthony Knapp leads the team with 21 pressures allowed. He's only allowed 6 hits or sacks on the quarterback. Emil Wagner's allowed 18 pressures. He only allowed 3 sacks or hits on the quarterback. Rocco Spindler's only allowed 1 hit or sack on the quarterback. Billy Strouth has, according to Pro Football Focus, has not allowed a single hit or sack on the quarterback. Pat Coogan has only allowed 1 hit or sack on the quarterback. So with all the things we complained about with Notre Dame, USC is far more problematic when it comes to that. Their right guard, Alani Noah's allowed 3 sacks or hits on the quarterback. Pregnon's allowed 4. Jonah Monheim's been really good. He's allowed 12 pressures, but only one of those was resulted in the quarterback getting hit. So they've allowed 37 hits or sacks on the quarterback on the season. Notre Dame's offensive line has allowed 16. Part of that's Riley Leonard. But the other part of that is just they're just not good at protecting the quarterback. And that's something Notre Dame's going to have to take advantage of in this game. And that's why if Lincoln Riley is smart, I don't think he's going to put this game on his O-line as pass blockers and put it on his quarterback to throw the football. I don't know why you put that kid in at quarterback and don't let the team run more. It just doesn't make any sense to me why you would do that. So I think that they will do a better job. They were good against UCLA. They were better against UCLA. Gave up a couple sacks, only gave up 7 total pressures. But there were still some issues in that game. They gave up 11 pressures. Noah, Murphy, and Pregnon all gave up 3 pressures against Nebraska. Allowed 4 hits on the quarterback. So they're better than they've been. But I think part of that was they were a little bit more balanced against Nebraska than they have been in a lot of games recently. And I think that helped them a little bit in that matchup. So you look at what they do, it's still a Lincoln Riley offense. It's going to be a lot of screen game, a lot of quick game, a lot of ISO stuff, doing a lot of things where they're going to try to get, use motions and alignments and movement to try to get certain isolations that they want to attack. They're going to find matchup advantages that they think they have in the pass game and do different things to get certain players matched up against those guys. Whether that's like maybe putting a faster guy or shiftier guy on Leonard Moore or putting a bigger guy on Jordan Clark or, finding ways to get their tight end. I could see their tight end being a big factor early on to try to maybe beat the blitz a little bit. That's a little bit of what Lincoln Riley does. His run game will be a lot of the, quick hitter, inside zone type stuff, trap stuff, also have some of the longer movement type stuff, the counters and misdirection type of runs. I mean, his offense is what it is. It's not any different than he's used in the past. They don't attack the ball down the field as much. That's the one thing that I've noticed is a little bit different about this USC team is they don't seem to throw the ball vertically like as much as we've seen in the past. And so they'll throw it downfield. Don't get me wrong, but just not with the volume or effectiveness that we've seen in the past. And that's been an interesting aspect of it as well. And then the kid, that they brought in, Jalen Maeva. He's thrown 11 deep balls in the season. So he'll chuck it deep a little bit more. I mean, he's 6 of 11 on the season on deep balls, but they throw a lot of short to underneath stuff. And so I think it's a little bit more. You've got to be aware of the deep ball now than with Miller Moss at quarterback, but they're still not chucking it deep a lot. And I don't think they should with this kid going into his first couple starts. They should have been chucking it deep a ton, but as I said, he's got 11 deep shots on the season and he's thrown 80 passes. So 1 out of every 8 passes is going deep. It's a lot more than what we saw under Miller Moss, but still not a ton of what we've seen in the past. So you're going to have to have a good plan to handle. They're going to try to get you in space a lot. They're going to force you to tackle well in space. They run game wise. I think the run game part is the thing that concerns me the most about USC is if they can come out and establish the run game with Woody Marks running the off tackle runs, running the quick hitting inside zones. He gets downhill in a hurry. He's a really quick kid. He's an elusive back. When they start doing some of their stretch stuff and they get that big offensive line kind of moving, they can open up some holes and get him rolling. Same thing with the, with their backup running back. So that would be my biggest concern if I'm Notre Dame is I'd be really concerned about going in there and giving up a lot in the run game and allowing them to do that. Cause I think that's when they're at their, like a lot of times teams that want to throw the ball, you're good to force them into incompletion or into the run, force them to run. Like Louisville, you wanted to dare them to run. Miami, Ohio, they dared to run. They were going to take away your pass game, and they did that. And USC, I think, is a different because USC wants to throw the ball more. I actually think they should run more. So I almost come kind of like, hey, dare them to throw it a little bit more. You know what I mean? And try to get your pass rush going and have a plan to kind of shut down their run game because that would be the thing that concerns me the most is that run game, especially when you look at some of the issues Notre Dame's had at times handling the run game. I think the receiver DB matchup is an interesting one. Notre Dame is very young there. I could see USC saying, hey, we've got some matchups that we like on the perimeter. I'm very curious to see which ones those are. Do they find ways to get at, to try to get at a Don Schuler in the pass game? Do they try to do things where they get their big tight end on Xavier Watts? Do they try to get Xavier Watts out of the box? Man, I'm curious to see who they think they can go at in this game. I expect their running back to be a big part of their pass game too, to try to be some blitz beaters. If Notre Dame's bringing their blitz, maybe running him on some angle routes, some swing routes in hopes that Notre Dame turns them loose. I think we'll see a lot of things like that. They do. I mean, like I said, their running backs got 47 catches on the season. He leads their team in catches at 47. And then their number 2 running back, Quentin Joyner, as I mentioned before, has 11 catches. So their top two running backs have 58 catches on the season for about 400 yards. And it's not just check downs. They'll hit a lot of check downs, but it's swing routes, it's angle routes. They're going to do a lot of things to try to get those guys in space. And Notre Dame's going to have a plan for that. And that's where their speed comes into play. That's where Notre Dame's speed comes into play, and you're able to kind of to take advantage of that. Now, the one thing that, and we'll talk more about this on Friday, is I'm very curious to see if Notre Dame's edge players are going to be able to have any success against the USC tackles. They've struggled so far this season in protection, but I don't know that we've seen this Notre Dame defense really have a chance since Boubacar went down to show what kind of pass rushing team they are on the edge. They haven't played a lot of teams since that that are really great throwing the football, in my opinion. And a couple times that teams have thrown, the edge pass rush has not been great up to this point in time of the season. So it's the other thing too, why I think running the ball might be more effective for them is because, and Roger Dodger, our USC resident USC fan, just made a point where he talked about how Maeva has a much stronger arm than Moss, but he's not as good of a decision maker. And that's spot on. And that's why against this defense, with as much disguise coverage as they run, with as much talent as they have, the tight windows that they provide, look, this is a defense that has shown they go toe-to-toe with top receiving corps. We saw that against Louisville. We've seen that in past years. We saw that last year against USC. We saw that against Ohio State last year. This is a team that They faced some talented receiving corps before. Not as many this year, but they have. But this is a Notre Dame team that's really good at forcing mistakes by the quarterback. I mean, they lead the nation in completion percentage defense. They've allowed 47.6. The number 2 team, Texas A&M, is over 52. That's a big gap. Notre Dame's second in the country at fewest yards allowed per attempt at 5.3. They've allowed 6 touchdowns this season, and they've picked off 15 passes, which is tied for 9th nationally, and they rank number 1 in quarterback rating allowed. Going into a game plan where you're going to ask Jaden Maivia or to Mayava to go into this game and rip this defense up and throw the ball 35, 40 times, it would be coaching malpractice. A kid that turns the ball over, throwing the ball a lot. He's a guy. Jay Henry also dropped 9 interceptions. Facts. I think they had 2 last week, right? But I just don't know how you go into a game against this pass defense and say we're going to put it all on our quarterback's shoulders, who's making his 3rd start of the season, and say go against the best pass defense in the country and throw the ball a bunch and have at it, kid. I don't think that. I think they're going to come into this game and run the ball, be balanced, and take some of that pressure off him, and then try to get Notre Dame to reduce the box, play tighter to stop the run, and that's when they'll maybe have some ISO opportunities outside and in the slot to create some big plays. So that's what I would do if I was in their shoes. I think that would be a mistake. I think if talk about how can Notre Dame blow USC out, it's that right there. That he just comes out and let's throw it all over the yard against this defense. I think that would be a mistake. But the one question mark is if Notre Dame can't get to the quarterback, that would concern me a little bit. And this offensive line is not great, but it's better than some of the, it's better than Florida State's. It's better than Virginia's, in my opinion. It's better than some of the teams that we've seen them play lately. It's not great, but it's better than that. So we're going to find out if how they can perform in this particular regard. Like, I didn't think Virginia's edge tackles are very good, and I didn't think Notre Dame did a great job of getting pressure off the edge against Virginia. A lot of the pressure that Notre Dame got against Virginia was up the middle, and was with your linebackers. And so, Riley Mills, your top 3 pressure guys in that game were Riley Mills had 4 pressures. You only had 13 in the whole game. Riley Mills had 4. Mookham had 2. Donovan Heinisch had 2. Jordan Clark had 1. Jack Kaiser had 1. You only had 2 pressures from the edge. Oh, I'm sorry. I did that wrong. That's Hurries. Riley Mills was their top pressure, got 5. Donovan Heinisch had 3. Mookham had 2. And then the other guys with 2, you had Bryce Young had 2, and Jack Kaiser had 2. Leonard Moore had 1. One of your backup DNs had 1. Drake Bowen had 1. Jaden Osborne had 1. Jordan Clark had 1. And Junior Samaka had 1. So you only had 3 pressures from your edge players in that game. And I think you got to do a better job of that against USC. You're going to need Josh Burnham to have a better pass rushing game. He's been great against the run. You're going to need him to be a little bit better against the pass. You're going to need Junior to provide you a couple rushes. And this is a game where you hope that RJ Oben kind of figures it out and steps up with his first real good pass rushing game of the year. And, of course, Bryce Young's going to get his chances as well. So we're going to see if they're able to do that. Like I said, I would not be surprised if Lincoln Riley goes out there and tries to throw it all over the field. That's just who he is. But if he's smart, he'll try to figure out a way to run the football and then use RPOs off that and play action off that to try to get his quarterback into some favorable situations. But if he's just going to drop back all game and throw the ball around, this is going to be a blowout. It'll be a blowout, in my opinion. So that's it for the USC offense. We're going to do defense next, folks. But do me a favor. See that little thumbs up button right below you? I want you all to go and hit that for me and let us know that you like the show. Helps us out. Helps with the algorithm, all that good stuff. And make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.oursbreakdown.com. We got a USC fan in the chat, BHTS Go HRD, asking about the keys for Notre Dame offense. We'll do that show on Friday. We'll dive into more specifics of what the Notre Dame keys are. We're kind of more focusing on USC a little bit more today, and but we will do that on Friday. So we'll go live Friday at 1:00, and we'll get to that one. But just wanted to give you a heads up, so we're not going to necessarily dive into that one here today. We're going to talk about the USC defense, though, because this has been an interesting season for the USC defense, because there's been times where they look like they reverted a little bit back to their old ways of just being a little soft, and there was a stretch in the middle of the season, where I just thought, boy, they're just not playing well. But overall, we've seen some improvements from this team. We have, and Danton Lynn has done a nice job of taking over a really bad defense that was just brutal, honestly, in a lot of ways. I mean, last season, USC gave up 432.8 yards per game. This year, they're down to 365.7. So that's about a 70-yard drop, a little under 70-yard drop, about 67-ish yard drop. Last year, they were giving up 6.1 yards per play. This year, they're at 5.7, which is not great, but better. And I would argue they have a little less talent this year, like athleticism, than they did last year, especially on the defensive line, because they've had some guys leave. Barry Alexander quit. No one should be shocked by that. You've had some injuries. Eric Gentry's been injured. You've had some other guys that have struggled. Some of the guys that were good for them last year have not really played well for them this year. Jamil Muhammad is a guy that's got no sacks and a half a tackle for loss on the season. Last year, he was a 10.5, 6.5 guy, 10.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. He hasn't played really well. Eric Gentry leads their team in tackles for loss at 6.5. He's only played 4 games. He's been out all year. Kamari Ramsey's number 2 on their team in tackles for loss at 5.5. He's missed 2 games with an injury as well. They've had a lot of injuries this season on defense. They have a lot of young guys playing. Sam Green's a young guy that's playing. Cameron Fountain's a young guy that's playing. They have a defensive tackle that plays a decent amount for them, that Notre Dame actually recruited a little bit. They ended up not offering him, but a kid from Minnesota that's a player that plays a decent amount. At least he has lately for them. That's Jide Abasiri. So they're a team that they throw a lot of bodies at you. They got Nate Clifton. He's been okay for them. He hasn't been as productive this year as he was. He had 7.5 tackles for loss at Vanderbilt last year. He's only got 2 this year, but they throw a lot of waves at you, throw a lot of bodies at you. They're not a real big defense. Their D-line, their listed D-line is 265 and 255 on the edge. They're 290 and 295 inside. They have a couple 300-pounders that they'll throw in there, but they're not super active guys. Their linebackers are short and stout. Easton Mascarenas Arnold is 6 foot 231. Mason Cobb is 6 foot 230. Their cornerbacks are good. Jacoby Covington's a big, tall kid. He's beaten out John Humphrey, who's not played well this year. He was good at UCLA. He's not played well this year. Jalen Smith's their other corner. Greedy Vance is their nickel. He transferred in from Florida State. Their safeties are pretty good. Killian Arnold and Kamari Ramsey are very good players. I have to think through the schedule here real quick for Notre Dame, but I would contend that I don't know if it's the best safety tandem they've played all year. I'd have to think through that a little bit, but it's the best safety tandem they've played in a while. Now, obviously, Jonas Sanker individually was really good for Virginia. Shaheem Brown's a good player for Florida State, and can be. But as far as a tandem, it's been a while since they've played a safety tandem as good as this tandem. So they've got some players. It's not a super talented USC defense. It's really not. And this is where Lincoln Riley and especially Danton Lynn and Eric Henderson and Doug Belk are going to have to really make their money. Is you've turned it around. They're a more physical team now. They're not physical, but they're more physical. They compete more. They're more disciplined schematically than they have been in the past. The issue that USC has is they just don't have great talent on defense. And so what Coach Lynn is going to have to do is he's going to have to do a better job of improving the talent. Now, there are some young kids I like. Some of those young edge rushers are good players that have some potential. Fountain's a kid with some potential. Sam Green's a kid that's got some potential. Those guys have a chance to be good players at some point in time. They're good. They're good for freshmen now, but obviously they're going to need a lot of work as far as becoming just normal every down players. So that's going to be a bit of an issue. Braylon Shelby's a good player for them. He's another young guy that's got some length and size to him. He leads their team in pressures at 19. He's got 2 sacks, 3 hits, and a quarterback, according to PFF. Devin Tompkins is an interior guy that will play a decent amount as well for them. He's a tall, long, athletic-ish type of guy that can be disruptive in some opportunities. So, and they'll bring some well-designed pressures. What I like about what Danton Lynn does is he'll heat you up on third down with some overload pressures, but he doesn't do a lot of overload pressures early. He has really well-designed 5-man stunts that I like that he does, and sometimes 4-man stunts where he'll drop an edge out. But he'll get his linebackers timed real well off of like a quick slant, just come right off. So if your guards turn in at all, they're going to give up pressures and let those linebackers get by. Very good coach, very disciplined coach. His team is a lot more disciplined than it's been. I've talked about this with UCLA, and you look at the job he's done with UCLA. In 1 year, he was able to get UCLA turned around pretty well. And then you look at what they are this year. The year before Danton Lynn got there, they gave up 29 points a game. The first year without him, they've given up 26.4 points per game. And the 1 year with him, they give up 18.4. And you look at USC and kind of what they were last season, they give up 34.4 points per game. This year, they're giving up 21.2. They've only allowed over 30 points in one game so far this season. That was an overtime game against Penn State where they allowed 30 in regulation, but they only allowed 33 in a game. If you look at last year, USC gave up over 30 points. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Did I do that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and they allowed 28 points 3 more times. So in 11 of their 13 games last season, they allowed 28 points or more in a game. And that's embarrassing. That's just bad. And this year, they are giving up 21.2 points per game. They've allowed 28 or more points only twice. That was to Penn State in overtime and then at Maryland. Now, they allowed 27 to Michigan, 21 to Wisconsin, 24 to Minnesota, 20 to Rutgers, 26 to Washington, 20 to Nebraska. So they're not completely turned around yet. They're not like all of a sudden some elite defense. And a big part of that is because he doesn't have the edge players that he had at UCLA. He actually had three defensive ends at UCLA last year that I think are better than anybody he's got at USC right now. And that's hurt him. They don't have that real dynamic front player. They don't have the athleticism at linebacker, right? The kids they have at linebacker are smart, tough, try-hard kids. Mason Cobb and Easton Mascarenas-Arnold and guys like that. Where you look at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's young at linebacker, but they've got freaks at linebacker. Drake Bowen's a elite talent, in my opinion. Jaden Alsbury's a freak. Jalen Sneed still needs to work on discipline and assignment correctness. He's getting better at that. But he's a twitchy, athletic, like just really athletic dude. And Jack Kaiser might be, it's probably him and Alsbury, might be their fastest linebacker. And I think people are going to be surprised at how well Jack runs when he get to the combine. You look at safety, and they've got a guy like Xavier Watts. They've got a 6'2", fast, twitchy corner in Leonard Moore, a super athletic guy in Christian Gray. UCLA doesn't have that, or USC doesn't have that kind of talent. And that's really what is holding them back from being an even better defense. And he had John Humphrey and Kamari Ramsey at UCLA. And obviously Achille Arnold was on that really good Oregon State defense, as was the Mascarenas-Arnold kid. But they're just not good enough up front right now. Now, they're going to play hard, but what's going to determine if USC can get back on track defensively is can he recruit? Because the one thing that Danton Lynn has shown me this year is this guy can coach. And you saw it game one. Just the first game against LSU, there were obviously some personnel deficiencies. LSU's receivers were beating their corners because they're just better athletes. But there was like 4 or 5 hits from their safeties where they're just laying LSU guys out. And that's what I like about what he's done is they're a much more physical defense. Their effort that this team plays with is far greater than what we saw from USC in the past. And that's a credit to this coaching staff, this defensive coaching staff. There's a lot of things. Y'all know I'm not a big Lincoln Riley fan. You guys know that. I have said Lincoln Riley's overrated for years. I used to at least give him credit for being a great offensive mind. I don't even know that he's that anymore. I think he's good at designing plays. I don't know that he's been a great play caller at USC, to be completely honest with you. He's had some talent that's allowed him to get away with some things. But when you watch this defense, you're like, that is what a well-coached group of players is supposed to look like. That is what and then you say, like, okay, if he can get the talent in there to match the coaching, then I think this defense is going to be pretty good. It's not as good as Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's coaching is even better. Notre Dame's athletes are even better. So I'm not saying that it's going to be on Notre Dame's level, but it's going to be a lot better than what it's been. I like what Dan Tomlin has done, but they just don't have the athletes. You know, like I said, a couple young guys on the edge that I like, but that's where Notre Dame's going to have to take advantage of this game. Is you want to talk about matchups? You know, what are the matchups in this game? Notre Dame's got to dominate up front again. I mean, that's really where this game is going to come down to. It's going to be the battle in the trenches on both sides of the ball. It really is. Both teams have athletes, and it's going to come right down to that. Can Notre Dame be more physical against USC? Can they play better than USC did up front? This is a different USC D line than you faced last year, where they had talented guys, Anthony Lucas and Bear Alexander and guys like that, but they weren't try-hard guys. They were front runners. This group of kids lack that talent, but they're more try-hard guys. And that's going to be a matchup that I'm very much looking forward to. And then their DBs are solid players, but this is a game where the Notre Dame receivers have a chance to make some plays if they can be locked in and play well. There's a lot of places where Notre Dame, talent-wise, could really take advantage of some individual matchups. What's the scheme going to look like? Do they play well? Can they protect the quarterback? Those are all things. But this is a USC defense that I would imagine against Notre Dame is going to mix up their personnel looks, be in their 4-2-5 when Notre Dame's in their 11 personnel. But I think they're going to have a big personnel group. I think when you see 12 personnel from Notre Dame, I think you're going to see USC bring in an extra linebacker, maybe an extra safety instead of the nickel. I don't think they want to be in situations where Notre Dame's running the ball and they got Greedy Vance on playing 50 snaps a game. I don't know if that's where they want to be completely honest with you. So I think you're going to see some different looks from USC. I think you're going to see them just mix things up a little bit more from a personnel standpoint and give Notre Dame some different looks. I think they're going to have to be prepared for that because I don't know that they can shut down Notre Dame's run game out of their base defense. I don't. Their run defense has been statistically good. As we mentioned, they rank 43rd in the nation in rushing yards, but a lot of that's because they've played a lot of teams that throw the ball. And I don't know that they're a team that can go out there and say, hey, we're gonna shut down your run game. UCLA is not a very good rushing team. Nebraska hasn't been a very good rushing team this season. At least against good teams. Washington's not. I mean, they've got their moments. They're not a great rushing team. They got a really good running back, but they don't run the ball a lot. They don't run it very well. I mean, when you look at USC's schedule, I'll just give it to you guys like this, okay? So when you talk about what their opponents do well, so you look at USC's rush defense, it ranks 43rd nationally, and LSU averages 117 rushing yards a game. It's embarrassing. Wisconsin this season averages 164 rushing yards per game. They held them to 106. It's a good performance. Minnesota averages 104 rushing yards a game. Penn State averages 192 rushing yards per game. They did a pretty good job shutting Penn State's run game down, held them to 118. Part of that's because they were way behind. They had to throw it a lot more. Maryland only averages 113 rushing yards a game. Rutgers averages 173 yards per game. They did a pretty decent job against their stud running back, Kyle Monange. Did a nice job shutting him down. He's a 1,000-yard rusher on the season. But that's because they could focus all their attention on that because Rutgers can't pass at all. At all. They are terrible throwing the football. As I mentioned, Washington's at 139.4. They've kind of wasted Joe Coleman a little bit this year. Nebraska is at 129.4. And UCLA this season rushes for 87 yards a game. They've played one really good rushing, team, and that was early in the season. Michigan was running the ball pretty good early in the year. Obviously went for 301 against Arkansas State. They ran for 290 against USC in that game. So they have, people said this about Army last week, and Army has a way better rush defense than USC did. They said they haven't faced anything like Notre Dame, and that's true, but that's true for a lot of people, and that's going to be true again this week for USC. Notre Dame is rushing for 221.8 yards per game and 6.3 yards per carry. If you look at how they stack up nationally, Notre Dame ranks 11th nationally in rushing yards per game. and they rank third. I think they're third in yards per attempt. The only teams ahead of them are New Mexico, who's got a quarterback that scrambles a ton, and then Boise State, who has Ashton Genty. I believe if you're going to look at USC, I think Penn State at 21 is the next best team that they've faced in yards per attempt. Notre Dame's 11th nationally in rushing yards. Penn State is the next closest to Notre Dame that USC has faced. They're 28th in rushing offense. So with all due respect to the kids at Penn State, they haven't faced a backfield like this, and they haven't faced a ground attack like this all season. Now, that doesn't mean that Notre Dame is going to run the ball very well against them, because they're going to have to be on top of their game. And this is a bigger defensive line than maybe some of the ones they faced in recent weeks. But that's going to be an interesting aspect of this is what does USC do to stop the run? Does their D-line step up and play great? Do they do a lot of run stunts? Do they put more bodies in the box? Do they bring their safeties down? I think one thing they're going to do for sure, in my opinion, is in some way, shape, form, or fashion with both of their safeties, not both at the same time, but using them both in different ways, is getting their safeties into the box. I think you're going to see Achille Arnold and Kamari Ramsey coming downhill a lot and getting and triggering one of those two guys into the box and trying to get those extra hats that way. Then it's almost like if you're USC, you gotta take something away from Notre Dame. And how do you do that? Is load the box up and say, hey, we're going to make you beat us with Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Greathouse. You're not going to beat us with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. You're just not. And I think D'Anton Lynn, being an NFL guy, understands that. That's a lot of that NFL mindset is. And that's what Al Washington is. Al Golden is. Al Golden a lot of times say, hey, look, we're just going to take this away and dare you to beat us with something different. And I think that's what USC will probably try to do against Notre Dame is say, look, we're going to load the box. We're going to – and remember they did that 2 years ago. And Notre Dame threw all over them. Well, D'Anton Lynn's a lot smarter than Alex Grinch. But so there's a right and a wrong way to do that. And I think you're going to see them have some sort of combination of safeties coming down and robbing a lot, coming off the edge, a lot of edge stunts to try to blow up the run game. I think you're going to see a lot of really aggressive twists. I think you're going to see a lot of second-level run stunts. I think they're going to crash their two linebackers. Because the thing is, like, if you give up a couple big runs because they cut behind you, it's like, well, they're going to break off big runs anyway. Notre Dame is. So why not do some things defensively that create tackles for loss and get them behind the sticks? I think that's really going to be the thing that what you're going to see USC try to do in this game, because D'Anton Lynn's a smart coach and understands that you got to stop that part of the game. Make Notre Dame beat you throwing the football. That's going to be the thing. Now, Notre Dame's been able to do that more often lately, but that's going to be where it's at, in my opinion. So this matchup's going to be very fascinating. Very much looking forward to seeing, what this USC defense can do, and how Notre Dame kind of comes out. What's the Notre Dame plan? Do they push the tempo? I think it would be smart for Notre Dame to push the tempo a little bit in this game. But this is going to be a real good test for D'Anton Lynn. And to see kind of how he is able to kind of get this thing turned around. Just doesn't have, in my opinion, doesn't have the horses to shut Notre Dame down. But I do think there's some things he can do schematically to maybe make Notre Dame work a little bit harder, or maybe force Notre Dame to get the ball out. And that's where Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Greathouse and Jane Harrison and Jaden Thomas are going to have to big games. And keep an eye on Mitchell Evans and Eli Rarid in this game as well. I could see Notre Dame doing some things there because, look, the two USC linebackers that they play a lot, you look at their snaps. Easton Mascarenas Arnold has played 686 snaps, and Mason Cobb has played 611 snaps on the season. And those are your three top snap goers of guys that could be matched up against Notre Dame's tight ends. And they're all 6 feet tall. Mason Cobb, 6 feet tall. Achille Arnold, 6 feet tall. The Easton Mascarenas kid, I think he's listed at 6 feet tall, but he ain't 6 feet tall. He's not 6 feet tall. I'm gonna text Ryan right now. Give me a second. How tall is the Mascarenas kid for USC? I'll bet you he's got some verified sub 6 feet measurements, right? Well, if you're Notre Dame, you've got a 6'5.5", preseason All-American tight end. you've got your number 2 tight end is almost 6'7", and your number 3 tight end is also over 6'5" in Cooper Flanagan. That would be a matchup where I would love to see Notre Dame try to take advantage of those players. And if you look on the season, Easton Mascarenas Arnold, according to Pro Football Focus, has allowed 38 catches on 40 attempts for 389 yards on the season. And he has 2 interceptions, which means when you throw at him, the ball does not hit the ground. It's either going to be caught by the receiver or it's going to be caught by him, which is the craziest thing like I've seen. That's a guy that I want to go after if I'm Notre Dame. I want to go after him in the passing game with my tight ends, with my running backs. I want to go after, Mason Cobb as well. He hasn't been thrown on as much, but he's another guy you can throw on. Those are guys that I'm going to really try to target in the passing game and try to go after. Achille Arnold, really good run defender, in my opinion. Not a great pass defender. He's given up 25 catches on 30 attempts for 300 yards this season, 2 touchdowns. So this could be a game where you could really see the Notre Dame tight ends in some matchups that could be really interesting against a secondary and a group of linebackers that are really short. And you think about all those years that Notre Dame had those really athletic but short linebackers, Drew Whites, J.D. Bertrands, and good teams would go at them up the seams with tight ends and different things like that. And Notre Dame has some advantages there, I think, where they could really go at this football team and really take advantage of USC just not being a really big football team. And, their nickel guy, Greedy Vance, is 5'10" and a half, maybe. So Ryan just texted me back. He's the verified measurements are 5'11" and a quarter. So I was right. He's a short guy. You got to go at him. So there's certainly some matchup advantages for Notre Dame, but here's the thing that you guys have to prepare yourselves for if you haven't watched much of USC this year. They're a much tougher football team on defense. They are a better coached defense this year. If you're going to beat them, you're going to have to earn it a little bit more than you have in the past, where they were just a team that just constantly got ripped up. They're not that team. Now, you can still take advantage of them. There's no doubt about that. But they're just not that team that just gets ripped up all the time. You look at last year, USC ranked 124th in the country in plays of over 20 yards. They ranked last season 102nd in most plays over 30 yards. Last year, they ranked 130th in most plays allowed over 50 yards last season. This year, USC ranks 26th in most plays and plays allowed over 20 yards. They rank 29th in most plays allowed over 30 yards at 16, and they rank they're 26th in plays allowed over 50 yards. That is a sign of a team that's not more talented, but far better coached and far more disciplined than what they were last year. Way different. And so Notre Dame, but so was Army, right? And Notre Dame was able to go out there in that game and rip them up as well. So Notre Dame has faced teams like this before, right? Army currently ranks 3rd nationally in 30 plays allowed of 30 yards or more. And a big part of that is because they were number 1, but Notre Dame just knocked them out of that part. Miami of Ohio is ranked 15th. Notre Dame ripped off big plays against them. So we've seen Notre Dame play teams like that in the past, and they've still had success with the big plays. Georgia Tech was one of those teams that was pretty good at limiting the big plays, and Notre Dame was able to rip off big plays against them. So that part of this, but this is a much better coach defense, a much more disciplined USC defense, a much more physical USC defense. They just don't have the talent. And so it requires Mike Denbrock to come up with a great game plan, and Notre Dame's offense is going to have to execute. And if they do that, they'll have success against this USC defense. But if they don't, and they're missing reads and they're dropping balls and they're, letting things go and coverage and those type of things, and then USC can have some success against Notre Dame. So that's where this matchup's going to really come down to, is how well does Notre Dame play offensively. If this is a B to B plus or better game offensively, this game will not be competitive. If the offense plays at a C level and they're turning the ball over, their offensive line's not playing well, they're dropping passes, they're having big plays eliminated by penalties like we've seen in recent games and different times, then this is a game that's going to be a lot more competitive than it should be, or than we might think it will be. And that's what it's going to come down to. So that's my breakdown of this matchup, guys. I appreciate y'all being with me today. I enjoyed it. And just a reminder, I'll be back tomorrow at around, we're going to go live probably around 7:45-ish, 7:30 to 7:45 on CFB Nation channel. And we're going to have the live recap or live analysis of the college football playoff rankings. When that's done, probably closer to 9, then Vince and I and maybe Trevor will go live on Irish Breakdown to break it down from a Notre Dame specific show. I won't do anything live on Wednesday. As I mentioned earlier, that's the day of my grandmother's funeral. I'll be back, and then Thursday's Thanksgiving, and then I'll be back Friday at 1 o'clock for our keys to victory, and then we'll do our game predictions, and then we'll preview the weekend's game. So we'll do that. We'll do that again. So I enjoyed it. Hope y'all enjoyed the show. Thanks for being with me today. USC fans, welcome. It's going to be an interesting week for y'all as well. So, but I appreciate y'all joining, and it's a big one. I always love USC Notre Dame. It's going to be a big one. So I look forward to this matchup and seeing what this Notre Dame football team is made of. And as I said to y'all earlier, USC is going to be trying to ruin Notre Dame's season, and Notre Dame needs to make sure that they don't allow that to happen. And that's what this game is going to come down to. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. Greatly appreciate that. And as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a great rest of your day.